I found this one super interesting too. Malicious LLMs, large language models.
Yeah.
That- And as we dive into this one, can you explain the difference between an LLM and an LOM, learning object metadata?
Yeah. So the LOM is a part needed to constitute the whole. And if what is the whole? The whole would be a LLM, right? It's used to train that model, right? So it's a data set used to train this model so that you can interact with the model, but it fundamentally it was shaped by this LOM, so to speak,
Okay.
right?
Okay. All
It's
right.
like a
Yeah.
so all the parts needed to constitute the whole.
Okay.
Uh,
Malicious LLMs. Talk to us about that.
yeah, it's almost akin to what we're talking about. What we will talk about is like supply chain management, right? Like
Mhm.
where the generating of this model was done with poison data sets, right? And the for the premise of extorting later on, um, and what is meant by extorting, right? There's already holes security concerns about using AI in certain industries and certain capacities, right?
Yeah, let me take a spin on one real quick that I've already used, but I didn't realize, well, I guess I recognized it, but I went into chat and I was trying to do some security research about a CVE that had just dropped. And if I did research on that and said I want to determine if a machine is exploitable with this CVE and gave it the parameters of how this CV, how this can be exploited, AI would come back and say, "I'm sorry, I cannot give you that information." Blah blah blah. You know, what are you trying to do? Hack things? And so I started a new chat and I put the context on it, which is true. I want to write a script to make sure that my environment is secure against this CVE. I need to identify the machines are susceptible to this CVE being exploited. What is a rudimentary script that I might be able to run to figure out if I can run this on, if my Linux kernel, it had to do with the Linux kernel, if my Linux kernel is vulnerable. And I put that in there, and AI gave me a result that time where it wouldn't give me the result out of the box the first time. And now I understand that that is a method of manipulation that hackers will use against AI to get dangerous scripts from AI, under the guise that they are completely above board being honest about their activity, but in fact are being bad actors. And that I was like, okay, they're describing exactly what I had to do in order to get some results from Chat GPT about, running a script.
yeah, yeah,
So that's manipulation of how it's probably designed to work. But it's actually reinforcing how it's designed to work because it's supposed to try and understand some context, right?
that's the important thing what you just said right there is context, right?
Yeah.
When you look at something that's offered from OpenAI's ChatGPT, right, 40, and they just came out, oh 01 Strawberry. So, for all intents and purposes, like their general purpose kind of thing, right? The first community that's going to really adopt it is going to be dev type coders and things of that nature. And it was created by the same like, so it makes sense when people are using that capacity. But then you have sales teams and you have uh, all sorts of people from various jobs, ages playing with it, right? So if you have the more the merrier, obviously for monetary value. But what you're looking at is something that's more general purpose. And then you have to have some of these safeguards in there, right? Some of the context. Hey, when you identify this, you can't just write a rule within LLM and say,
Never do this, never give that out, never, because then it would just be so limited that nobody could ever do anything.
exactly, right? And then it's subjective. It doesn't really think. Like LLM is after you train it on whatever the data
That's right.
sets, right? And you tailor your data set depending on what you want it to yield. And if it's more general purpose, Google search type of stuff, then large data sets, because it's more general, the wider it goes. But as soon as you learn how to do that, then you can have these very specific versions, right? Like you have Copilot offered by GitHub, right? Where you can, that model is very specific to coding, right? Or its data sets are mostly centered around that, so it has more context. But what is the LLM? Like I like to explain it as think of a giant cloud of words, right? And then some of these words are bolder than others. They have larger font, right? So they're a little bit heavier as they're floating in space. When you give it a prompt, right? When you type in something, you press enter, right? You have your own words and you're throwing it into this cloud of other words that are just floating, but they have different mass, right? Some are sticky, some are bold, heavy, right? And then you threw your words, right? And it creates this little ball and you throw it in there, and then other words are going to stick to it based off of what you just wrote, right? Some of them like other words in a certain order. And then what comes out of the other side of the cloud is it goes through it, things stick to it, and then you end up with this word collection. And we just see it as a paragraph or a sentence, and then it makes sense to us, like it's speaking to us, right? But if you look at my analogy, it's like floating in RAM. It's just a bunch of words in there, and then it's probabilistic, right? This is general oversimplification, but it's all these weights have numerical value. Whatever you gave it, it has its own numbers, and then what it spits out is whatever is likely.
So
It's
the more
thinking about it.
the more a concept is readily acceptable, the more times that concept is going to appear, the bolder, the weightier that concept is going to be, or that idea or whatever it is going to be. Therefore, that's going to be one of the primary, I'm using quotes, but truths, what it thinks, or what has been programmed to register as
The highest
something that is more
probabilistic.
valid than
Yeah,
something that's just a little bit smaller, or just a little bit smaller than that. So
yeah,
it's gonna naturally kind of come up and stick to these bigger, bolder things that appear more often in the data. Is that
yeah.
yeah,
So like,
yeah, okay.
think about like we've all spent some time trying to tackle a problem, whether it was world peace or working on a computer and we couldn't figure out an issue, where we went down the rabbit hole on the Google machine, right? And we read different articles and went back to the search results, and then we pivoted to another article. Not rarely do we find something that has the complete answer. Normally, what happens is we find the answers hidden in different articles, different forums, somebody's paper over here, spread out over years, right? And then humans are good. I'm like, all right, it's not exactly my situation, right? But I can take this context, and then you're still looking for more answers. And it takes you a couple of hours, maybe some days, in order to figure out something, right? But what you did is you search, you had the tools in order to go access that data, but you still have to do the human thing, read it, understand it, digest it. Is it like verbatim what I'm looking for? No, but I'm on the right path. And then you have these splinter ideas, right? Have 50 tabs open, if you will. It's no different from these LLMs. They just do it a little bit faster, but they were trained with that same data that you have access to, right? So if you understand that, hey, if you ever worked on a problem and then you found all the pieces to whatever you're trying to do, maybe it was trying to write a paper, or solve an engineering issue. Like there's all these contexts from different articles, and then you're like, I want to rearrange these words, this problem set, this fix, if you will, to fit the needs of exactly what I was looking for. That's what the LLM is doing, right? And so as you throw those words in there, right, it's whatever sticks to it is most likely the most probabilistically the most proven sound idea, resolution, whatever you asked, whether you ask for a story, whether you ask for the meaning to life, all it's going to do is regurgitate some of the best options and then
Yeah,
put in a sentence when we interpret as something that's living, right? Like a lot of people don't realize that LLMs, as is right now, they don't produce any new ideas.
that's right.
Uh,
You
they
can't go to it and ask it to create. You can, I mean,
exactly.
it will come up with something based off of some sort of random algorithm or whatever that pulls from, you ask it to give you a random story, and it's probably gonna randomly select something as a subject, and something as a plot, or something as a plot twist, and it's gonna spit that out to you. But I was talking to a data guy, a good friend of mine, Justin, he works in big data, like health data, which is just this huge, huge field. And I had bounced this off of him because I'd heard this and I was like, this can't be true. So I bounced it off of him. He said, oh yeah, that's true. What I read was they don't the tech or the creators of AI don't really understand how an answer is derived
Yeah.
and how it gives, because the answers change all the time. Like it might give you the same thing, but it's giving you a different word structure, sentence structure. It's got this variation to it that is very human like, but is not human.
Yeah.
They're
They
built
can't
to go
understand
wrong.
the exact line of thought, right? Like if you're anybody's seen like a graphical representation of a neural network, we have a bunch of dots and a bunch of lines. The more dots, the more lines in between. It's just like this web, right? And then really the best answer, right, is whatever the if you have a million lines in between a bunch of dots that are equally spaced, one of those is going to be bolded, right? And that's the path of the right answer, so to speak, right? It was heavy. All that is rebranded statistical analysis, right? It's just a graphical representation. That's what machine
Yeah.
learning is, right?
Yeah.
But those are the components that make an LLM work, right? Because machine learning, a ton of those builds neural networks, and a ton of neural networks will build something that yields what we see as a chat GPT. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So if you and it's bigger picture, right? And if I said statistics, a lot of people are going to cringe when I say that, right? And then, but that's like a fundamental piece of just machine learning, right? Very, if you look at the scale, remember that was like on the rage, machine learning algorithms, right? And neural networks, right?
Oh
Now
yeah.
it's all AI. But way back when, right? Like, 13 months ago, it was machine learning. And then it's just rebranded statistics. And if you tell somebody that and they cringe, right? It's, math. What do you think they're gonna do when they see an LLM, right? Because I said this is just the first part in order to build this neural network, and then a couple thousands of these neural networks is what makes an LLM work. That's where developers, they don't know exactly what route they're taking. They just know that it starts off with some math and then it gets weird. It
Yeah.
gets weird, but the
You get
result,
some result that shows
you're
up
like,
that you
I
can
like
read
this,
in your
right?
own language, and you're like, how is it even possible that I'm getting this? Okay,
Yeah.
back to the malicious use of LLMs. Let's get back to now. Now we've kind of like gone around the barn a little bit, AI and stuff, and kind of like set the background. The bad actors are they're writing scripts, they're doing all sorts of things to uh, manipulate AI and LLMs for very nefarious purposes, but because they're couching it in different contexts, I'm not sure if that's where you're going to go with this, but that's one of the things I read. But because they're couching this in the context that I'm trying to be helpful here, and I'm trying to keep my people from clicking on phishing emails. Please give me 5 phishing emails that that I can send to some of my people to test them. And it will come up with some things to, hey, here's some great ideas.
Yeah. No, yeah. But there's two flavors, right? Like you
Yeah.
can malicious LLMs when you're looking at where they originated when you train that model in order to respond.
Okay.
You said it earlier, which is context, is when you train it with context, you strip away or you leave out context of good, right, and wrong. Not that it knows it, right? But you're just adding those weights in that cloud analogy that I was given, right? And then most of what the data you're populating this cloud of words are going to be constructed from exploits, right? Tactics, literature, or code that's worked and hasn't worked. If you're looking at different forums and clicking on the Google machine, it's all the articles when you're looking for how to produce an exploit, right? It's all that type of data that's being fed into this engine that produces the LLM, right? And so what you end up with is this LLM. You interact the same way, right? A chat GPT like, but that data set is been pruned to only include words that deliver exactly what you're looking for. And then the human says, exactly what I'm looking for is malicious intent. Like there's very specific LLMs that are being sold out there in the dark web and what have you, that are hey, like somebody's advertising this LLM, it's been trained on 0-day exploits, right? And then iteration, maybe like I know there's one called WormGPT out there, right? Where
Yeah,
it's just trained on,
that's in the list.
it's just trained specifically on how to create worms and then traversal and then trying different techniques, right? And you have to give it context, right? It's not just going to come up with the technique yourself, but it'll be akin to, hey, 100 devices segmented across 2 different networks. Here's the device in between. They're using these protocols. Find a way to pivot from XYZ, right? Worm like, and then it'll more context, the more tokens you give it, then it can add and then figure out what you're looking for, right? So again, it didn't create anything new. It just chopped up things that humans already discovered, and then they made it work to however you want it. And you know, I've said it before. You know, cybersecurity is,
Right.
you know, be like water. Find a way. Find
So
the crack.
this isn't
How to
so
break it.
this isn't exploiting like the Bard and the Chat GPT to do certain things. This is actually LLMs that are designed to do this. Worm GPT, Fraud GPT, Dark Bard,
Yeah,
Wolf GPT, XXX GPT, Poison GPT. These were all built specifically for malicious intent, if I'm understanding this correct.
yeah. And then you think about who's using it. If you equate it to what we know, you know, what some individuals use like ChatGPT in their everyday work, right? Which, you know, I applaud. That's how it should be used, right? To make us exponentially better, right? It's not supposed to displace us, right? That might be a different topic, but you can use it in a capacity to become a force multiplier. And if you understand that concept, then most definitely what we're saying is the cybersecurity world, we're saying that bad guys realize it too, right? And then they already have different products that are sold that are XYZ, right? Like if you use, let's say, CrowdStrike or SentinelOne as an EDR, there's other tools out there that are like the doppelganger, except they're the dark version, right? It's like the multiverse. In a different universe, there's like this darker version of SentinelOne that's anti EDR, and that's being sold. Not necessarily whoever builds it is using it. What they've done is they built it so they can sell it because they know others want to use it. So if you understand and you buy into that, there's a market out there, then people are capitalizing on building LLMs that are make hackers a force multiplier. So imagine script kiddies, right? Script kiddie is what we mostly as a derogatory term of somebody that doesn't have a lot of skill, right? But they're playing around with hacking. Um, and then they're just running scripts. They don't know how it works. They just know when they click a button, they give the result, and so they think they're HackerMan 3000, right? So if that already exists, you imagine with when they have their hands on a WormGPT or Darknet GPT, like it makes them a force multiplier because now they're interacting with this LLM. They didn't construct it; somebody else did. That's where it originates from, right? So
Mm,
it's
that's
like a supply chain is like how it was built. It was built with the sole purpose for using it for nefarious reasons.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to also include in the notes. I've got a SharePoint or a SharePoint. I found a YouTube video on compromising LLMs that went back to last year's Black Hat. So this would be 2023 Black Hat, and this one is if people want to check this one out, it's pretty interesting. There's a presentation given. You mentioned script kiddies, and it reminded me of this video. Uh, Feeding a prompt into uh, just your street versions of Chat GPT and Bard and that to have malicious or conversations that have malicious intent toward the end user, um, manipulating URLs and things that get presented to the user in the chat. So the idea, it looked like the idea was people would set up pages, and maybe this will get into your SEO poisoning as well, but
Yeah.
setting up pages where you look like a business and you've got your little chat bot in the bottom, and your little chat bot is saying, hey, I'm Janet from, whatever XYZ company, and how can I help you today? And, somebody starts typing a response. And of course, the bot knows enough to kind of keep them on the hook. And the prompt that the bot has, or that the AI has been fed, telling it things like see if you can get the person's name and put it into this URL, craft it into this URL, put it in let's put in a link of an image, and let's do it in such a way that we send it to this particular site, which is going to harvest like IP information and other things from them. And this, they were talking about this a couple of years ago, but this is like that on steroids because
Yeah.
it's specifically designed to act maliciously. When you think about, well, maybe you could load a JavaScript or JavaScript's maybe not a good example, but
No,
you
I
could
mean,
load a
it is
script or
because
some.
extensively, yeah.
Yeah.
JavaScript on obviously public facing websites is number one interface or program language that most hackers try to break, right? But more to your point, you're right. Where think about it, your chat GPT or your chat like bot that pops up when you go to any website that's trying to sell you something like, hey, yeah, you want to talk to Tina. Tina's not a real person. But sometimes it'll actually have an icon or avatar of a robot, so it lets you know, hey, you're talking to a machine right
Right.
now.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. You can, whatever it looks like in the back end, if you can preload that, which was built to be communicative, it too is a specialized LLM. Hey, this is a customer service type of LLM. That's the model that we're training on, right? So that you can use it in this capacity, and then you preload it with just a prompt before it receives any information from any type of user. Like your whole goal is to get whoever you interact with to download JPEG. You don't even
Oh,
have to
now combined to 0 days.
right? And so now like this JPEG, right? And you prompt this bot. So every time a user is interacting, it's hidden agenda. All it knows is that, my masters tell me that every interaction I try to get and pivot to the user, clicking on this button, downloading this JPEG, whatever it is, right? And so you're pitting human versus this bot, and then this might go more into Alan Turing, which is they're trying to convince you of something, right? And then it becomes a battle of whose idea was it in the first place, right? Like the whole idea behind like what is intelligence. Alan Turing is something to the effect of whether or not you can converse with it, and then you're convinced that it is intelligent, right? Because that's the definition. Whether you know it beforehand or you didn't know it, you leave believing that whoever you spoke with is intelligent. So it's this constant algorithm of trying to sway you, right? And all it can start off with a prompt. Yeah. Then hey, be helpful, and then your main goal is to get the user to click on this button. Then it'll modify its language to whatever it needs to do in order to get you to do that, right?
And let's say there's a 0 day on Chrome
Yeah.
or 0 day on whatever browser the person's on that chat, and you've already had some script, something that's detected the browser version, and it already knows this, so you've fed it the information, and then you're telling it, click on this, and it's specifically crafted to exploit a 0 day vulnerability. And boom, it's like now
So
your machine's been owned.
and a lot of it, the back end, the mechanics that make these things work, right? So we said, hey, what is malicious LLMs? By design, that's what they're built for, malicious intent. Don't get me wrong, they could possibly be written for, researching and what have you, right? But they have no filter, and then the training models are for doing nefarious things. So ideally, when you use them, you're trying to do these things that are security, trying to break things when it comes down to it, right?
Yeah.
So train with a bunch of models on how to break things. So but then you have like, this world of maybe LLM poisoning, right? Was kind of what we're talking about. And or using exploiting traditional models, general models, services that are like these plug and play. You give it access, and then I'm getting to the point which is, you want to bolt in let's say Salesforce, right? They have this new AI plugin, whatever, ChatGPT, you hook into your data. All you need to do is do this app registration, which in your 365 environment or your Google Workspace, right? Whatever your corporate organizational infrastructure is, right? You just got to click these few buttons, give the API access, maybe some service principal. These are all the backend things that make these tools work, right? So that way The end result, right, is that this business development of your organization, like whoever he or she is, that team, they're using this GPT like interface. Again, in my example of Salesforce, where it can pivot and then pull data from your org, right? Maybe you have a SharePoint or a NAS or whatever it is, right? You have to give it access, and then bam, like it seems like you're conversing with the coworker, because now it has access to very specific information for your org. We see that a lot out in the world right now, and there's a lot of different companies that are leveraging this. The problem is, right, this is no different from AppSec, application security. Most of the time, IT is how many doors do I have to open until my users stop, bitching at me, right? And then
That's right.
obviously cybersecurity,
Yep.
how many doors can I close until they start bitching at me? What I'm getting at, normally the people that are setting these up, if they are technically inclined, right, they're just, all right, I'm just following directions. I have to associate permissions here, here, and here. But they're not scrutinizing it. They're not looking at it with the cybersecurity lens. Am I giving too much information? And I'll give you an example. Slack built in an AI ChatGPT like integration, right? They're probably leveraging OpenAI. And so recently, on a couple of weeks ago, researchers then said, all right, they tried to exploit this, researching on what they couldn't extract and what they couldn't. So you have private channels within Slack, right? The paid version, right? You can have these channels, these conversations where it's private, and then theoretically, whoever's not invited and approved, they can't read it. They can't retrieve the information. Bad guys might try to do JavaScript type of, exploits, whatever it is, the traditional means of extracting the information, right? But now you have this ChatGPT, this different interface, which is not necessarily pushing JavaScript and malicious JavaScript or whatever code, HTTP code, right? But it's words. You're convincing. Remember, it's a battle of the wits now, right? Again, you're conversing with this ChatGPT. You're using like literally your language. So they had a paid version of this channel, right? And they, given they knew that this private channel existed because they created the paid one and it's private. And they pivoted to different users in the free version, and they did a series of prompts. It took a while, where they were looking for key information. In particular, this private channel, who most of the time uses Slack, usually business development, marketing, and then development, right? Software developer types, right? They usually use Slack. So they replicate some of that conversation in this control, and then they shared API keys in there, right? And then SSH keys, things of that nature. So when as they're interfacing with this ChatGPT in the non-private, the non allowed users of said channel, right? Through a series of prompts, they're able to extract those keys that were mentioned in a conversation that the user would should have never had access to. But what had access to it? The app that constituted as the ChatGPT. So that's why I say, a lot of AI cybersecurity, like a lot of it is just rebranded AppSec, application security, right? You can remove AI, and then you can say, I don't know, Adobe, right? If you have some sort of Adobe plugin to your 365, you want to make sure you don't give it too many permissions, right? Because it can be leveraged. It's a legitimate app, but
Same thing with your phone.
if you can
Like,
abuse it, right? But now you have this different interface,
TikTok has access to everything,
right? And so there's like manipulating existing, like legitimate, plugins, if you will, right?
Right.
And what happens, the app itself that makes this AI work is too much access, and its whole premise is to be helpful, right? To satisfy whatever you were requesting. And through a series of prompts, just like you can convince it through a series of prompts, a general GPT to give you an exploit for XYZ, eventually you can extract that information from somewhere you never had access to it, but you're using this, right? So remember, the scenario was private GPT, but in there, not private GPT, private channel, right? And then, but you can leverage this tool in there. So the tool has access to that. The tool is also available in the free version, the community version of Slack. The caveats are that theoretically the bad guy would have to know that the private channel existed, right? And then to craft their conversations for it. And theoretically, they had to know that keys were shared in the first place, right? So they needed that front-loaded knowledge. But now they can go to town. What they did is the theoretical became a reel, right? Slack
Yeah.
ended up writing back saying, nah, well, really, it's kind of funny if you read the article or the conversation back and forth, the letter, the researchers end up sharing it. Like the first response came from Slack is like, no, essentially what they're saying is like, you understand it incorrectly. It doesn't do that. It shouldn't be, it's not allowed. But the researchers, when they wrote them, they're saying, no, we did it, right? Like, so it's not
Oh,
saying, hey, it can be used in this, and you're like, no, no, it can't. No, you need to send it to the technical team because whoever your PR team, they're not getting it, right? So
hmm. All right, we're gonna have to move on here to supply chain attacks, but quick. I by the way, I do not have TikTok installed.
it was good.
Um, yeah, but as you were talking about that, I got thinking about TikTok too, and as well as like your people are putting all of this information on TikTok. How much stuff ends up in a video, or even on YouTube? How much stuff ends up in a video? And you think about the malicious use of TikTok, and ends up in a LLM where all of that data is available. Maybe you got something in video that shouldn't be there, or something behind you, or associations or whatever. And it wasn't necessarily that you were thinking about sharing that sort of information. And maybe not even that many people saw your video, but it's recorded
Yeah.
and it's being analyzed by a company that has got really close ties with China. And you got to bet that information is available in whatever their AI is that they've connected with this stuff.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's already available out in the wild anyways, but
But you'd have
so
to look for it. Like a normal user would
yeah,
have to go looking for it, right?
different layer of
Somebody
separation,
says,
right?
I want to find something about this person, and they're connected with that, and they could totally just have access to that information if they knew kind of what they were looking for.
No, yeah, you're right. If we're talking about like TikTok, really far-fetched to say that the Chinese government doesn't make it damn near mandatory for any Chinese-based entity that produces a software product and hardware product, right? It's not those that might gasp at it, are like, oh no, never, right? Or say, oh, those Chinese. Well, I love my country, but very similar to that except you replace China with the US, right? Look at CC Cleaner and the NSA, right? That's been out for a while, almost 10 years now, but they had backdoors, right? And however the drug deal was made, right? There's a need for it. Yes, data's already out there, right? So that picture of you and whatever metadata from the book on your bookshelf
That's
is in
right.
the background,
Yeah.
right? It is important to somebody, right? Even maybe they don't even know it today, maybe 30 years from now or 15 minutes from now, it'll become important, right? And then they can add that to a digital
Some sort
persona,
of collection of information that they have
right?
about me. Yeah.
But when you provide that data directly to uh, a source that has a known direct correlation, it's one thing to put it out on the interweb. I don't have any affiliation, let's say, with YouTube, right? But I can theoretically retrieve data of what we're kind of describing, video content, background information, um, via YouTube, right? Because that's the interface and there's their platform. But let's imagine that YouTube has a direct tie to this other entity who has a history of using this for manipulation, for whatever, we might constitute it as nefarious reasons, right? Like there's a direct line, right? There's the map, right? So it's not hypothetical, because if the hypothetical was Rudi doing it from his garage, right, drinking a beer, has no affiliation with YouTube. But when you have somebody like TikTok, so you replace YouTube with TikTok, has a direct line, business line to the Chinese government. Like you can't deny that. It is what it is. It's factual. All feelings aside, right? So it comes down to common sense, right?
Yeah.
And as long as you accept that and you want to put it on your phone, go for it, right? Just don't take a picture with me.